Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Skofi Growth Council. If you are stumbling in from LinkedIn or TikTok or wherever you found out about this, we're glad that you're here. Odds are you're connected to me somehow, some way. Either you are a Skofi partner with findmyitpartner.com, or we're connected through our network or through the industry, or you know Jeffrey, our special guest, who I'm about to introduce. But if this is your first time on a Growth Council session, this is who it's for. All right. So this is for anyone in the IT services space who wants to wrap their head around practical, tangible ways to help grow an IT services business. So if that's you, you're in the right spot. And we're glad that you're here. So don't be shy. Say hi in the chats. I see Benjamin there, Jess. Glad you guys are with us today. Why don't you give us a shout out where you're from, where you're watching from today? And we'll get started here in a second. But my name is Jonathan Schofield. I am the founder of Skofi and findmyitpartner.com. We connect businesses to MSPs, which is why I care about this. We spend 100% of our time helping MSPs grow and trying to figure out how to crack this tough nut. And once a month, as I'm able to, I bring in special guests like we have with us today to share their experiences, their knowledge, their insight, and some hot takes on what's worked for them or what they would recommend or suggest. So with no further ado, I want to introduce both our special guest and briefly the topic for today. Jeffrey Newton, who is the founder of the MSP Insider podcast. Hopefully I said that right.
Yeah, you got it.
Co-founder with Sift.ai, and he can share a little bit more on that. But a little to his pedigree before all of that, he spent a significant portion of his career working as an MSP in the managed IT services space. So he's definitely got some more stories he's going to share with us today. So Jeffrey, thank you so much for being here. Why don't you take a second to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. This session is not only going to be this amazing trauma bonding experience that we're going to have, but I promise that you will walk away hopefully with more than some light bulb moments, but some real actual tactical takeaways from my trauma, but my experience as an MSP. Jonathan mentioned I spent 18 years in the MSP space. I worked for 5 different MSPs, 7 different times. And the first half of that journey was on the ops side, so up the technical track. The second half of that journey was in the sales and the growth side. So anywhere from being an individual contributor to running and growing in the sales teams, kind of figuring it out, crushing it eventually, right? But like I had to crack the code. And how do we do that? By screwing it up a lot, right? Making a ton of mistakes, but failing fast and figuring it out. And then grew from there. And that was the sunset then on my MSP journey, moving to being a co-founder at Sift. Now I get to sit on the vendor side, which is a totally different world, but I get to serve MSPs. So it's to your point about pedigree. I love this part of the experience because I get to have conversations with my former self. And honestly, it's just trying to go back through that filing cabinet of F-ups along the way and grabbing the like how-to manual out of, hey, hopefully you hear something that will help you avoid what I ran into. So as passionate as I am about it, I promise there's like a truckload of humility behind everything that I will share today.
Well, yeah, I really appreciate you sharing a little bit about your background, and we're going to jump right in. So today's topic, break the playbook, why most MSP marketing fails. Jeffrey and I got together a couple weeks ago when I knew that I wanted him to be a special guest on this series. And we were talking a little bit about, what's the most relevant and what's the most interesting and what's the most exciting and personal thing that we could share that we think would be universally valuable. So he chose the topic, he chose the title, and I am here for it because you talk about the trauma bond. I work with MSPs all over the US, and they share their trauma with me on all the things they've done and tried that doesn't work. So very excited for this. So with no further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it, shall we?
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Yeah. So just like you said, what I want to do today is like hand all of you the playbook that you already have. Maybe you just reach into your filing cabinet and you pick it up and you dust it off. And we're just going to throw that shit away today because there's so much garbage in what the industry has thrown at us as MSPs on how to do it successfully. And how do I know that? I used most of the playbooks too, right? And it's not all garbage, but most of it is. Why? Because it was built like 15 years ago and just repeated through history, and it's sold to us now as like, go do this stuff. But fundamentally speaking, the market itself has evolved and changed underneath our feet. And so we still bring old messaging, old marketing tactics, and specifically just the wrong words to the conversations that we're trying to have, right?
Mm.
From the MSP standpoint, you ask any MSP, it doesn't matter what it is. If there's more than one in a room, you ask them. There could be hundreds in the room. And if you did like a show of hands thing, it would be like raise your hands or whatever. If you ask the top 3 things that they want to fix in their business, right? It's usually get leads, get more leads, grow. Something to that effect is going to be in the top 3. And I think the focus is in the wrong spot because in some ways it's a bit like groupthink, right? Like we do want to grow. We don't know how because we're sort of accidental businesses to begin with in most cases. And then the industry tells you need to go do these things. And so we're really going to tear down the walls of maybe even throw some stones at some industry best practices that aren't going to get you anywhere. The playbook that they've sort of fed you, whether it's the vendors or, consultants or any of that stuff, and ultimately get down to how do you fix that moment where you get an email from a current client referring you off to someone else, right? And like you freeze. And then you overthink the shit out of whatever you're going to say in that email back, right? And like you end up creating some dissertation about how you do all of these magical managed service things with all the acronyms that no one cares about. And then you don't understand why you got ghosted, right? Or like why the message fell flat or why it was so confusing or why you ended up in a pricing conversation. Like all of those things happened to me too, which again is why I broke this down kind of into a system of ultimately thinking through saying what matters to the people that you need to say it to get the conversion, which is ultimately the goal that we're all striving for anyway, right? So let's dive straight into it. You are not broken, but the system is, right? And I hit some of this in the intro, but the real core and the real thing that I want you to take home out of the pre-frame for the rest of this conversation is just because you've been trying all of the things everyone's told you to do and you haven't seen the success that you were expecting, it's not your fault in large part. The only way it's going to be your fault is if you didn't execute any of the things that anyone told you to do, period, right? So like, I will not allow you to abdicate responsibility for not doing anything, but I will give you permission to be frustrated by doing a lot of the things that a lot of the market has told you if you did it, right? And I know that's one of the things that Jonathan preaches to his clients, his internal team, and imperfect action will beat overthinking perfection all day, every day. And you just have to get into motion so that opportunity can find you and you're in a position to grab it when it's there. So again, that's my only caveat. As long as you're doing something, now we can just switch the things that you're doing and increase the conversion towards the result that you want. And when I thought through this topic and when Jonathan and I were talking through it, like marketing is this big, ethereal, massive, wide scoped section of business. I think it's one of the reasons why in large part we get taken advantage of when it comes to like, you need marketing or you want leads, turn the key and it'll happen. So I really kind of broke marketing down into 3 core functions, if you will. Like marketing is the overall banner, but the most critical piece of marketing is this little slice called messaging, right? The actual words that we use to communicate what we do to the people we want to do it for, or to the people that want us to do it for them, is the most critical piece. Messaging is more important than marketing or any of the channels that you put your message out on. So I want you to, write that down, type it in Notepad++, whatever your flavor is. But the messaging matters most. It is where we will end up spending a lot of our time, is dissecting the messaging component. And then adding a little bit of a sales flavor to this, because that's really where my passion truly is, the psychology and everything else. It really came down to that last M, momentum. All right. So we're going to break down how do we cultivate, how do we curate, how do we create momentum such that everything in the universe conspires in your favor to win, right? And again, messaging is kind of the linchpin there. So we're going to dive straight through that. I can break down different avenues of how to apply this, but I don't want you to just listen to this guy that's yelling on the computer. So one of the things that I enjoy out of the MSP Insider show is that I get to talk to really brilliant minds in the industry who have demonstrated success as well in the interviews. And so I took actually a couple of quotes from recent interviews specifically on the topic of marketing, because I knew when these quotes hit that it was something that I needed to have heard somewhere along the way when I was still in the MSP seat trying to make it happen, and didn't have someone there to like grab me on the shoulders, look me dead in the eye, and give me a little bit of that tough love. Like, I know you don't want to hear this, but you need to. So really, let's dive straight into like some initial thoughts on some of the people that I think nailed it. So the first one was the brutal truth. Comes from Katie Vreeland. If MSPs don't invest in marketing or in their brand or image, then you won't scale. They need a machine that creates repeatable growth, right? Like, so go back to the very opening really of this conversation, where the concept of I want leads, or I want to grow, or I need this thing, right? There's so much that goes into whatever your want is. You want to grow. Okay, great. What does that mean? You want 10 leads a month? You want 1 lead a month? You want a new customer? What you actually want is to grow the company, right? Which is the result of all of this stuff. Net new customers, signed contracts, new MRR. That's what they all tell you. So it really isn't about focusing so much on just the leads piece. And if you can't do it predictably and you can't scale it, like you can't control it, then you really don't have it nailed yet, right? So that was the piece that I really wanted to highlight from her, was that most MSPs believe marketing is just doing the thing. I almost said taking action, but I can't say that because I opened by saying you have to take action. The problem is we were fed a bunch of bullshit by a bunch of people. And so we end up doing a lot of things that don't produce the results. And then worst case scenario, they blame you for it at the end of whatever the contract term is, right? Like, well, you didn't do this thing. You did this thing, but you didn't do that thing. And then we're just sort of like more than jaded by the time we're done with it, right? So the key is to build the system, the structure, the process, the procedure that you can literally hand off to someone else to get done. That's how you know that you've actually baked it appropriately, is it can be replicated, right? And if it can't be replicated, then it certainly can't be automated, and it has to be dialed in that close, that well. The next one was really the business prison. I loved this concept from Paul Green in my conversation with him. And that was that you don't need 10 different platforms. You don't necessarily even need to hire a full marketing team, right? You just needed, again, that magical keyword, a system that turns strangers into leads. And then from there, sales can take over the transfer of conviction, which is what sales ultimately comes down to. And that's where conversion will happen too. And so again, we're focusing in on there needs to be a system. The system is only as good then as the messaging that we end up putting in it. That's where I love Kevin Clune's quote. And that conversation, it was great. Now, if you don't know who Kevin is, go check him out. MSP Growth Hacks. It's awesome. But the thing that I loved most about talking with Kevin was he actually didn't come from this industry from the beginning, right? He came as a marketer, and his background was the absolute hardest marketing niche possible as well. It's called affiliate marketing. For those that don't know, that's like, I'm going to market someone else's product and I get a cut of only the sales that I make. So think of it as like 100% commission sales rep, but it's not your product and you have no control over fulfillment or any of that, right? It's just referral based marketing essentially. And like, if you don't convert, then you don't eat. So he had to figure out the mechanics of good marketing in an industry that's arguably the hardest as it relates to like niches of marketing. And so the thing, his perspective, I respect a lot more. One, because it comes from outside the industry, but two, because it's so dialed in, because he came into the MSP industry and then crushed it as a result of getting the fundamentals right for marketing, right? So his take on the MSPs with that, we didn't even know what we're doing or who we are. So we end up trying to sell the wrong thing, is like the spirit or the essence of it, because we sell from our own perspective, which again, more to the opening, that ends up being that like dissertation email of, here are all the acronyms I can cram into the thing. Please, don't you want to take a 95-minute meeting from me? it's just like a hard sell, right? It doesn't sound that appealing. So the overall process for marketing, this goes back to Katie's episode actually, where like she stripped away all excuses as well from the conversation and said, look, most MSPs will get it wrong because they don't know where to begin. Her thesis was begin where you already are, right? You didn't wake up one day and have 30 clients. You didn't wake up one day and have 100 clients. You didn't wake up one day and just have the one. So start with your people. Like, let's go have the conversations with our current customers. And I know Jonathan has a great process for this too. Maybe he can speak to it just slightly, but it's like, we're going to go have conversations with the current people that already bought from us what we're trying to sell to other people. Do you want to chime in there at all, Jonathan?
Well, yeah, first of all, this is exactly what I believe this community needs to be hearing. And yeah, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to say something. Low-hanging fruit, man. If you haven't asked your customers why they work with you, right? If you haven't reverse engineered the sales process with your top 5, 10, 15 customers, it's like free market research that you're just leaving there rather than guess who your customer is, rather than, throw mashed potatoes against the wall and hoping something sticks. Ask them before you launch that marketing campaign, before you launch that digital ad campaign, that those emails you're going to send out, that networking event that you're going to try and plan. Talk to your customers. You have so much knowledge right there in front of you in your own portfolio, and half the MSPs that I talk to rarely have those kinds of conversations with their customers. And I'm not sure why. I think there might be fear or just maybe lack of awareness that there's all that gold just to be mined in your own customer base. But yeah, talk to your customers.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, especially in the post-COVID world, right? Like, I think the change was already happening before COVID happened, where the advancement in technology and the layers of tech between the people was how we were optimizing as a business, right? RMM was phenomenal. You didn't ever have to go on site, barely, unless the power of the internet was out. And even then, they could wait till it came back on, basically, right? So like, we added all these layers of tech between the people. Well, if you rewind, for those that have been in it long enough, I was in it for 18 years as of 9 months ago, right? So I was in it for quite a while timeline wise. The beginning of my career, I spent a hell of a lot more time on site in my customers' offices, in their ecosystem, in their world, which exposed me to basically everything that I needed to solve actual painful problems, to sell them anything that I felt like they needed, like to add the value. And it was just through proximity alone, like osmosis almost, right? Sitting and talking to Sally at the front desk and hearing the inter-office chatter, all those things. We've gotten so far removed from the things that are now like in our heads so hard, like picking up the damn phone and calling someone instead of texting them or sending the email or the Teams message. Like, just human to human interaction will expose to you all that peripheral access to where the pain really is. And it's the pain that people pay for the solution for, right? So that's kind of the breakdown here, is like, what does really real marketing look like? Well, first, start by talking to the current people that have already bought what it is that you're selling. Odds are those earlier customers did so through your voice, not the watered down, neutralized garbage that the vendor Slick has created or your marketing company used on 900 other websites. Like, go back to the principles. I used to challenge the MSP owners that I would coach, is like, have you forgotten where you came from? Why did you get into this? Right? Let's literally cut down to your core of all the brain damage you could have chosen or opted in for as a job. Why this one? Why are you willing to go through it? And when you really start getting into those, then you'll uncover the language that will transfer conviction. That's the language that you want to put in the system, right? The campaigns. Hopefully you have a CRM. Hopefully you're not trying to use a PSA for it. And that's a whole different like 9-hour conversation. So we're not going to go in there, but nevertheless, like, your email isn't good enough and a spreadsheet isn't going to cut it. Why? Because it's not going to take the action, because you're going to have way too much other shit that you're reacting to at all times that it just won't go out and happen. Right? So build a system that works for you. Goes back to the whole replicating and automating thing. And then shipping consistently is the constant pulse of value going out to the people that you want to hear it. So moving through, And again, Jonathan, if there's any questions or anything that come up, feel free to throw them at me because I'm not paying any attention to the backstage at the moment. But
no, there's been a few comments, but no questions yet. And hey,
right.
by the way, just this, I'll take this opportunity to share with our viewers. You've got in Jeffrey a world of experience and some scars. So take advantage of that. If you have questions for Jeffrey or myself, don't be shy. And if you have comments on what you're hearing, if that resonates with you, raise your hand and we'd love to hear from you. If you want to challenge it, because, I think Jeffrey and I would both admit that we don't have this all fully figured out ourselves. So give us your thoughts. Carry on.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive into messaging because I've, preached a little bit already that this is the most important part. Taking messaging down a little bit further, it really begins with this first point here is like you have to be saying something that is actually worth repeating. If you think back to how you grew your company originally, how is it normally happening for MSPs? It's through referrals. Well, how and why do referrals happen or occur? It's because you're referable, right? Like you are actually providing value in such a way that people want to rave about it. If you don't know where to begin, Raving Fans is a brilliant book to be thinking differently. Like understand that you're not a tech company. You at a minimum need to consider yourself a services company. And ideally, you're going to go a step farther and you'll look at yourself as a hospitality company. Those three categories alone are drastically different businesses, all of which affect the messaging that you end up using. So again, like you must take the first step to not be a tech company and be a service company. Service company is about people, helping people, providing an outcome. What is it that you actually do for the people that you serve? Talk about that. Do not talk about your solution. Talk about their problem. Talk about the outcome, right? How do you do that? One way to do that is to acknowledge that every buyer, every prospect, every person that's going to make a decision, this goes back to transferring conviction. Every individual will stay exactly where they are until you paint one of two realities. You either talk about a problem that they have that they do not want, or you paint them a picture of a promise of a future they want, but they do not have. Either one of those forces is going to get them to move, especially in an MSP sales cycle where we are an event-driven sales cycle. What the hell does that mean? Well, there's like 5 reasons why someone ends up changing providers, right? It's communication, the primary person leaves, maybe they got bought, security event, or like a catastrophic hardware failure. There might be a couple others, but most of them are going to fit into that. And you can't force those things to happen, but what you can do is use the right language throughout the entire sales process and experience that will actually change the way they're thinking about the event to where they don't want to wait for it anymore, because you can create enough pressure, enough tension, enough desire, emotions. I know it's kind of weird for us as MSPs, but those are the things that drive decisions. And you have to generate enough of those on the inside of them to get them to realize that the perceived pain of making the decision to change is not nearly as great as waiting for the event to happen. Messaging is how we do that, because we can compel them by generating those emotions to drive the urgency. And the only urgency that matters, regardless of what any guru tells you, is their urgency, right? So we have to create their urgency to make the decision to move. Otherwise, you're just chasing them like maybe 2 or 3 times worth of email follow-ups before you just abandon it anyways, right? Because you don't have the system. You have a million other things to do. And the fortune is in the follow-up. All of that is true. Time kills all deals. That's true too. And so the messaging has to create the urgency to get people to operate and execute quicker, right? Oh, here we go. 5 reasons noise from the customer. Yeah, that is very true. Like there's a key word in there, which is caring. Pete, is like, if you can't, again, transfer that conviction or show up in a way in which you care, there's plenty of others out there that'll show up and help them feel cared for.
So right? True. I wanted to chime in. It's like what you're saying. I resonate so much with. I had a conversation with a very young IT provider. I mean, like their business is months old, right? He's just starting out in the industry. He's getting his first clients. He's got less than 10 endpoints under management right now. So he is totally green. And we were
Yeah.
talking about like, well, how do I go get my first customers? And, it's like, what should I be talking about? And I said, well, you need to understand like who your customer is and the status quo that they deal with, right? If you just throw MSP marketing terms and industry terms at the customer, like you said, that's chasing. That's
Yeah.
chasing somebody with something that is of no interest or value. But once you understand the status quo of the customer, like this is the reality that they live in. This is where my customer lives and breathes and eats and deals with pain. Now you can start to articulate the future state, right?
Right.
There's the status quo, and there's future state, and then you present yourself through messaging as the conduit between the status quo and the future state. So this is uncomfortable, this is painful, there's something wrong, or there's opportunity being lost here in the status quo. And to get to the future state, I don't know how. And that's where you position yourself between those two as the bridge. It helps them get from status quo to future state. So
Right.
that's how I like to reiterate what you were sharing there about like identifying where your customer is.
Yeah, absolutely. And the most important part about helping them, one, see a bridge that exists, but two, getting them to want to walk across it is, again, back down to like the words that you're using, is getting them to, one, believe that you do have a plan that has a high likelihood of achievement. That's the thing that they're getting, which delivers the outcome that they wanted. So that's like the future state, the ideal outcome. Now the only thing left is what I split the sales thing into two decisions. One, have they emotionally been compelled to say yes? They want the thing that you're selling. But then there's the logistics, which is all the other stuff, right? So now you have to deal with the logical brain after the emotional brain's been committed. And the logical brain is the most commonly tripped up on, I would say, in this industry. Why? Because we're so black and white, right? In a lot of ways. And because the industry tells you have to do it a certain way. Here's your 43-page contract. Here's your 96 pages of terms and conditions. You don't redline anything. Tell them to deal with it. Your price is your price is your price. Your term is your term is your term. Like, yeah, have you ever sat in a freaking seat and actually sold a damn thing anytime in the last 5 years? Like, there is a way to figure out how to get to a yes, right? And the logistics is the easiest place to meet the buyer where they are and sell them what they're willing to buy. And you aren't really losing out on anything. That's more of a higher level philosophical conversation. But man, that frustrated the crap out of me when I was having to build, grow, and run sales teams with what the industry best practice folks were telling me we had to do.
Yeah, Jay chimed in here. He says, what are your thoughts on the challenger sales methodology, educate and help the ICP discover the solution to their pain points? And I think this is kind of relevant to what you're sharing here, Jeffrey, because the key word in here is their pain points, right? So like I see MSPs attempt to educate their ICP all the time on why multi-factor authentication is important, good password hygiene and data protection and all of these things. But are those in the mind of your prospect, in fact, the pain points that they're dealing with? So generalized education is not enough. Understanding the reality your customer is, understanding their pain points. What are your thoughts on that, Jeffrey?
Yeah, there's three words that jumped out. The methodology, so challenger sales. I'll talk about that specifically because I think it served a particular timeline in the market. I'll come back to that one. The next one was ICP. I mean, the dirtiest word outside of probably contract in MSP is ICP, right? Like raise your hand if you actually have one, but like really have one. You could show me the piece of paper that said all of the characteristics of your ICP. And I don't care if you have more than one, but like, do you have one?
Right.
The 9 out of 10 times, 9 out of 10 MSPs in the room won't. And that is the first challenge, because then you can't get to what Jonathan said earlier, where like, I don't know what your reality is. Why?
Right.
Because orthodontist's reality is not the same as a trial attorney. So you can't speak to their pain. Here's an unlock. People, in generality, people will always come to an agreement on a problem, and I hate absolutes, by the way, and they will always argue about the solution. It's the way the human brain works. So if you don't know who you're supposed to be talking to, trial attorney, for example, and it's the orthopedic surgeon, like, you can't talk about an orthopedic surgeon's problem to a trial attorney and expect them to care enough to be compelled to make the move, right? So like ICP is the thing I wanted to hit on that. Challenger sale, I think, had a great timeline for our particular market. Here's my issue with it, where it stands now, though. This goes back to a previous teaching that I did with Jonathan. Go back into the archives and find it. It's on the 5 stages of awareness. The issue with our market is that the buyer of IT, of an MSP, has evolved through the evolution of MSP. And the quick version of what I mean is, if they're problem aware and solution aware, and they believe the MSP is the solution to the problem they have, that only works until they touch the stove 2 or 3 times and it's freaking hot, right? Which means, have they outsourced before? Did they have a bad situation or relationship with a prior solution trying to solve said problem? Once you get to 2 or 3 or 4 of those hot stove touches, MSP is no longer the solution, right? Because now they have this warped reality of, well, I'm just not going to touch that hot stove anymore, because it's no longer synonymous with being the solution. And so where I believe Challenger sales sort of lost a lot of its momentum as a methodology is that it's really more about challenging the status quo and or the current pain that they're in, right? To like get them to think about the frame of reality they're accepting differently, and the only frame you want them to accept is yours. That worked when people hadn't touched the hot stove before, is kind of my interpretation and or execution of that particular methodology. It's still better than not having one, don't get me wrong. You can still structure great conversations. The most important piece to take from it, in my opinion, is which frame of reality am I trying to get someone to accept? And then that comes back to kind of everything else we covered in this. It really comes down to the messaging, positioning, all the things that roll up into marketing. But pick a process or a methodology so that you do it the same way every single time. And that way you can measure your baseline and get better and optimize for improvement.
Mm-hmm.
Which ended up kind of covering this wheel. So I'm going to jump to the next slide as well. Anyway. All right. Branding like you mean it. This is more about finding that voice, right? Like being authentic. The interesting thing here is, again, whether we're listening to the marketing slicks or we're going and checking like the 7 other competitors in our geo to figure out how we need to update our website, is like everyone's reading from the same book. And then you go to like the number one pain or the number one problem MSPs will tell you when they're dealing with sales is like, I'm always competing on price, or there's always someone higher, there's always someone lower, and you look the exact same on paper. Read down the typical MSP list here and tell me that you aren't guilty of having, I don't know, 3 out of the 5 situations happening to you, right? Except when you change the words that you put out there, that's where we can start to think of ourselves as a magnet. Now, the interesting thing about a magnet is people usually only pay attention to one part of the energy that's happening, which is the attraction part. And good messaging will take care of both forces that you need to have happen, and both forces are happening in a magnet. At the same time as it is attracting, it is also repelling. That's just as good. I think one of the fallacies that we have is scarcity mindset, where, well, God, Jeff, if I only want to target orthopedic surgeons and within a 72-minute radius or mile radius of my business, like, what about everybody else? I don't know. Are you closing anyone right now? Like, you really have to like get down to the point where you're having one conversation, solving one problem for one piece of pain for one person. And then you repeat that at least 10 times, right? And then you can start figuring out, are there other problems for other people that we can solve? Do we want to or don't we want to? When you get down to being such a specialist, now you can command price, right? But it's the words that cut through everything else. It provides the clarity. You know, Weiser always says the confused mind says no. Donald Miller calls it if you confuse, you lose. Like, Donald Miller basically destroyed everything about, not destroyed, like he nailed, I should say, everything about the MSP industry, right? Websites suck. They don't pass the caveman test. And if you confuse, you lose. Go look at your website. When's the last time you've looked at any of your marketing stuff? It probably has nothing to do with the people that you serve, the outcome you deliver, or the problems that you solve for. It's going to be all that word salad bullshit that doesn't do anything except confuse people and force them to treat you like the commodity that you're frustrated with being, which is just like this cost comparison thing. So messaging matters. This was probably going to be my favorite slide of the whole thing. So it is what it is. Best practices are bullshit. It's a lot of the same reason that I talked about, like the buyer stages of awareness in our market. This is why most of those best practices only became best because they started 20 years ago and they kept selling the same thing and enough people got on board. And then we had some groupthink. And yeah, it might have leveled up an industry that has total chaos and total like lack of organization and completely absent of most business acumen. Because let's be real with ourselves. We weren't MBA students that started an IT company or a technology company. We were like really smart tech folks that happened to be good enough talking to people that we convinced a few people to say yes to wanting our services, and we didn't want to work for somebody else. And then we accidentally ended up with like 5 employees and $1 million in revenue. We don't know any of the other business stuff, and that's fine too. The problem though is when you start blindly following all of the best practices because you believe it's the only way to do it, a couple years into that journey, at least this was my experience twice, you'll turn around one day and wonder like, why do we look like everyone else? Why do we feel like everyone else? Why are we competing literally the exact same way as everyone else? Why are we the same price as everyone else? And then you don't understand where your differentiators are. Why? Because you stripped them all out of who you were. You literally like diluted the gene pool, one employee at a time, through the best practice stuff that everyone else is following. There's only 3 out there basically that you're going to follow anyway. So like the odds are not that diverse as to whether or not you're going to compete in any form of differentiation in your own geo. And most of them don't optimize for differentiation either. Why? Because they have to hit as much of the macro market or as much of the TAM as possible too. So like the whole thing is just sort of this crazy echo chamber that is self-perpetuating, and the only person that's losing is the MSP.
That's right.
It's like a parasitic relationship. It's wild. So let's just break down some of the myths, right? Like the thing that the industry pushes on you is in that column, the myths, right? You use their marketing docs. Why? Because they made it easy for you to put your logo on it and send it out, which also made it easy for everyone else to do the exact same thing. You go to these industry events, odds are you go to the same ones because there's some comfort there. Maybe you get to see a preferred vendor or something like that, right? But like it's really just this false dopamine hit of, one of the things I used to say is like getting drunk on the delusion of the action. But there's a big difference, and Robert Gillette talked about this on the show too. There's a huge difference between like just doing things and doing the right things. And that's one of the things I think the industry events sort of imparted or instilled as well, is like we use them as an excuse to get the hell out of the office and like check out and feel like we actually could check out for a couple of days. And we don't lean in and leverage it for everything we could gain from really going in with the intent of learning, right? We just want to buy the new cool shiny shit that we see there. We want to feel important because they're going to take me to steak dinner. Like insert the amount of things that we enjoy from going. I'm not saying you shouldn't go to them, but I am at least saying like we sort of have to check ourselves on what we're truly doing compared to the outcomes that we want, right? And so again, I don't need to read down the list because you guys can screenshot it. I can even get this deck over to Jonathan for later if anyone wants to grab it to download as well. But the bottom half I did want to hit because to me this is the action stuff that's like the derivative of the first 3. So like you post useful stuff on LinkedIn, for example, right? We have the endurance of a freaking goldfish too, because we're so like cause and effect, and we're so, I tried it, it didn't work, it's binary, it's black and white, you write it off, on top of probably being jaded as well, right? So like all those things work against us. It's like, well, I posted for a week, I didn't even get one like, or I got a bunch of likes, but no one commented, or I got a bunch of comments, but I didn't get one DM, or I got 3 DMs, but no one wanted to meet, right? We always sort of like sabotage ourselves through the lens of the outcome that we're optimizing for. And the main thing is like we come to that conversation with 2 different mindsets. So this should be helpful. As an MSP, let's think first time appointment, right? So we have a scheduled appointment, we're going to have that conversation. Generally speaking, and I usually do this as the Venn diagram or 2 circles that don't overlap, is the MSP comes to that conversation wanting something completely different than what the prospect came to that conversation for. The MSP comes there because they want a client, they want MRR, they want a contract. The prospect came there because they either didn't want the problem they have, or they wanted the future that they believed you might be able to give them, but they don't have it, right? So like they come for information. They come hoping that you'll be useful. They come looking for help, guidance, assistance. And we're immediately clashing from the very first engagement. And then most of us as MSPs also are not used to sales, although we say that we sell. We do order taking, right? Somewhere in your qualification questions, it's probably something like this. How many users do you have? How many locations do you have? How many computers might you have across that topology? Cloud, local, right? Like, what the hell are those? It's literally just qualification questions that aren't even qualification questions. It's literally, I'm building a quote in my head so that I can send you a proposal. We call that order taking. We don't call that selling, but the industry tells you that that's selling. Usually you're doing that to a referral as well, right? You didn't have to do any of the hard stuff to actually convince someone to make that move. And so you combine those things, and again, you sort of get disheartened. My favorite one on here is probably this one, and you can probably tell based on my own voice. The take a stand, make enemies, and be polarizing. It's not just being like a shit poster, and it's not just being like a protagonist. The most important part about this specific to your messaging, and this will be a takeaway for those that are watching, is go download or Google or whatever, watch YouTube, Russell Brunson's conversation on the prolific index. And it's everything that you'll need to learn about this. Here it is in short, though. There's an index. And on this index is basically like your vanilla dead in the center. For anyone still listening, that's what the market tells you to do. That's what the vendors put on their piece of paper. Vanilla. It's the same thing to everyone, right? On the outside, on both sides of that spectrum, you're polarizing. That's like the shit posting. And there's no real value here, but it got my attention.
Right.
Just on the inside of polarizing is prolific. You're willing to say something that sounds original because it is. You're willing to challenge the way that it's always been because we all deserve better. You're willing to speak explicitly about the problem that you solve for the personal injury attorney, right? You're going to the point where it appears prolific because it actually makes me feel something, right? You don't talk to my head, talk to my heart. If it's about sales and marketing, like get the emotional resonance with the person you're speaking to. And so even if you just took your current messaging or had like a 3-minute conversation with ChatGPT and then asked it to use the prolific index and make sure that you were prolific, not polarizing and not vanilla. He doesn't call it vanilla, but that's my word choice. Like move slightly as close as you possibly can to the prolific section, because that's where messaging actually moves people, which is what sales truly is. Anything on any of that before I move to the next one, Jonathan?
You'll appreciate this one from
Yeah, absolutely. He's figuring out what that spectrum is too.
That's right. That's right. If you know, you know.
Whoops. There we go. Momentum. So I talked about this at the beginning. It's so huge, especially like when I either took over sales teams or was building them or rebuilding them. Momentum, and I actually stole the concept from, I think it's Alex Sharfin, maybe, because it was the first time that word actually made me feel something. It was the first time I felt understood when I heard him talk about the entrepreneurial personality type. And I'm going to really water down the concept, but essentially it was like they only emotionally connect to the feeling of momentum. And as a result, like momentum is it's bi-directional, but you really kind of only accept one direction, right? So like if you're not growing, then you're declining or receding, whatever word choice you want. But momentum is also 100% controllable, right? And like if and when you build it, that's where I talk about the entire universe conspires in your favor, right? You must be in motion to capture an opportunity, which means you have to take action. Even if it's imperfect action, you will learn along the way. You will figure it out along the way. Want to know how I know? Because you dove into your first exchange migration without even knowing what the hell the data sets or the data stores were, right? Like you figured out how to migrate to Office 365 for the first time because you told someone that you would, even though you had no idea how, because we're resourceful as hell, right? Like it's the same thing with sales. So momentum starts with the absolute smallest decision and smallest action in your day that you have total control over, that you can force yourself to do, and then you get the dopamine hit for doing it.
That's right.
So your alarm goes off, you don't push the snooze button. That's a win, right? Maybe you push it twice instead of 3 times. That's a win until you push it once and then you push it no times. Same thing. The alarm goes off, your feet are on the ground within 5 seconds of when the alarm went off, right? That's a win. And literally break down your day into these micro wins that will build momentum, that will lead to closing contracts. Why? Because it's confidence. If you're not confident in the thing you're selling, then no one's going to buy it, right? I don't want to buy something from a sales rep who's sweating through their clothes, because that's not really transferring any conviction or confidence or to the commitment that I'm trying to make, right?
Have you read this book, Jeffrey, The Compound Effect? Darren Hardy. It's a short one. I highly recommend it. It very much reiterates what you're saying about the idea of small wins, small actions consistently and faithfully applied over time. Though they are not perfect, the consistency of disciplined effort in time will reap tremendous reward. And the previous slide you shared with all the myths. A big challenge that is IT providers will follow the myth, and then they'll do a thing, and maybe it's not even always a myth. Sometimes they've been given some kind of meaningful advice, but it's not ever faithfully and consistently applied over time. So it's like, oh, I did a digital ad for 1 month and I spent $500 and it didn't get me anything. So digital advertising doesn't work. That's the conclusion made. And when you treat the growth of your IT business as a reactive thing that you're going to invest time in as you have time to do it, you're like, oh, I'm super busy. I've got 25 business clients and they all need my focused attention at all times. So I guess I'll get around to the sales and marketing stuff as I'm able to. That's like saying, hey, when I'm not busy is when I'm going to start eating right and dieting and exercising. It's like, well, no. If you have physical health and wellness goals, you don't wait till you have time to do the thing. You do the thing, and it's not going to be you see results after your first execution, that first one small choice you make. The consistency of effort faithfully over time is where you see it. So that resonates with me. I wanted to throw that out there because it's a book I highly recommend for those that for sure. It's not even a sales book. It's like if there's anything in your life or business you're trying to achieve, start with the small choices that you make every day.
Yeah. And at the top of this pyramid is exactly that, right? It is the catchphrase that anyone who's ever worked for me on the growth side will tell you they don't want to hear from me again, which is consistent action over time. It is something that I learned probably in my 3rd year out of those 18 working at MSPs. One of the secrets for success for your MSP, sucking a little less than the next guy and staying in business a little longer, is literally how the industry is shaping up, right? And so how do you force some of that stuff? Consistently doing it over time with systems, with tools, stripping it all the way back down to the things that I can control. I can control whether I follow up immediately after that call or 3 weeks later. One of the things you mentioned that I like to do, again, when I'm either consulting with or engaging with MSPs, I'll do a time audit. Why? Not because they hate it, because I really want to see in the list of to-dos, where is the priority, right? So I can ask that MSP, what do you want to do? I want to grow. Okay, like how many leads, yada, yada, get the number, whatever it is, 3. Well, then it's like, all right, let's do a time audit for a week and give me your to-do list, all right? And those same people, the actions of those people, the habits of those people, the individuals, tell me how incongruent their goals and their desires are with the actions, because send that proposals like number 17 on a list of 23 things, or follow up on that sales call from last week, or get the quote out. Like all the sales stuff pools at the bottom of the to-do list. All the dopamine stuff is at the top for technical people. Well, no wonder, right? No wonder the business is in the same place it was a year ago. No wonder it's going to be in the same places next year if you don't invert the habits, the actions, the inputs, right? Bad inputs don't produce good outputs, is really kind of the core message here. And you have complete control over momentum. So like it's a little bit of no excuses, right? One of the things that Tim Conkle said that I loved, because he put it so plainly, but essentially it was, you know, if you aren't happy with where your business is and you're responsible for making all the decisions, then it's your fault, right? And he uses a mirror and he'll give it to you. And that's the truth of it. Like if you're responsible for the decisions, even maybe you don't own the place, sure, whatever. But if you're still responsible for decisions beneath you and you aren't happy with where whatever you're responsible for is, it's your fault.
That's right.
The freedom in that, though, is accepting it and owning it and take total agency over the fact that it's my fault. Why? Now I can change it. I can either be a victim to it or I can change it. And that's ultimately what momentum is about. It's like, it's the headspace stuff that you have to nail. Anyway, click, run, success. This is like, how do I begin to take any sort of action based on anything this crazy guy said on the growth council concept?
And hey, Jeffrey, I want to chime in. We've got about 5 minutes, and then I'd like to have a few minutes left over for a Q&A with anyone to chime in. I know you're on a roll. I don't want to interrupt your flow too much, but just giving you a heads up there.
Screenshot this slide, and I can be done talking about it. There's a prompt or two that can really help you figure out specifically, how do I dial in my messaging to talk to one person about one problem with one solution that I generate or I deliver. And there's the formula to do it. Again, don't make it harder than it has to be. Go find your current messaging and then go have a conversation with AI about this formula, this framework, and dialogue with it. It's not just like a Google search where you take the first response and you accept it. Interact with it, tweak it, give it a voice, give it a personality, make sure it's yours, and then double down and own it. The message should make you feel something. Go look at your competitors and see if they have that message on there too, right? My final call to action, so the timing was okay-ish, was that we really back to the momentum, right? We don't just build it. When you have created the system of consistent action over time, you will become it, right? Like it just is the thing that happens. And as a result, all those opportunities that you wouldn't have been in a position to accept, you'll get, you'll hit, you'll move, right? You'll be able to capture them because you're in motion for it. This was a little bit more of that like final jab too on just start taking imperfect action now. You don't need that next perfect campaign from the vendor, right? You don't need another playbook. You don't need to go sit on another webinar, just like this one. What you do need to do is take the one thing that you're like, damn, that was a really good friggin' idea, and go do it. And then commit to a timeline of doing it. Time block it, put it in your calendar. Call up somebody and have them be your accountability buddy. The other thing, again, I learned from Russell Brunson, is like, you will find your voice by repeatedly doing it as well. It's awkward. It's okay. You know, Kyle Christensen talks about daring to suck. Go do the thing. Go dare to suck for a little while. That's the accountability slide. Are there any questions out there, Jonathan?
There was one from Jay Rodriguez earlier in the call, and we can pull this up. And hey, you got like 2 or 3 minutes, folks, if you want to pick Jeffrey's brain or myself. And before we're done, I definitely want to make sure we encourage folks to, know how they can get a hold of you if they want to have a future conversation offline with you, Jeffrey. But how would you answer Jay's question here?
Typical questions or a framework. Yeah. I wrote a book specifically about that. Actually, I had no intention of plugging that, but it's like 186 pages of all of the sales stuff that you would need to ask in MSP. Here's a couple that really worked for me. Again, post-COVID, pre-COVID world, if I can get in the conference room of the individual, there's generally a whiteboard, And so I would do a pattern interrupt of walking to the whiteboard, grabbing a red marker, and usually I had a decision maker, but it may not be the ultimate decision maker, right? Imagine your CEO walks in the conference room right now with this marker, storms in the office, and writes 3 things that they care about most on the whiteboard. What are they? And the reason that question mattered so much is that it may have nothing to do with what the person I'm talking to thinks they're trying to solve as far as the problem went. It would just tell me what the priorities were of the business. And then I, as the sales rep of the MSP, could align what we do and how we do it to drive those particular priorities. It comes from continuous discovery habits, kind of, where it's like people think they tell you the right answer, but they don't tell you the answer on how they actually behave. If there's not another one.
The MSP sales code, is that your book?
Yeah.
Found it
it's on Amazon. Yeah, it's the only.
I'll drop it in the chat for those of you who want to look at Jeffrey's book. That's a really long link. I promise it's not malware. It's just
I only remember how many pages there are, but there's at least like 10 questions, and then there's coaching and like understanding the psychology behind it, which is really kind of the entire concept. But it's essentially like how I trained and how I ran all my meetings. Discipline and consistency. Yeah, right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, hey, everybody, we are so grateful that you are here today and that you spent time with Jeffrey and I. Did I just put in a -1 in the chat? What was that? That was weird. Okay. I don't know what that is. I actually, I just gave myself a -1 review. That's funny. Yeah. So consistency of action. Choose that unbreakable discipline that you're going to implement this week. Jeffrey, how can folks get a hold of you?
The only place I'm active is LinkedIn. So Jeffrey Newton on LinkedIn, you'll find me. If you look up MSP Insider, you'll find me. If you look up SIFT, you'll find me. You can also go to our website if you want, sift.ai. Jeff@sift.ai is my email. Any of those will work, but LinkedIn's certainly the best place. I drop content all the time on like tactical stuff every day. So if you liked any of this, you get a little bit closer to the tactical stuff daily.
Love it. This recording will be available on YouTube and other places. So if you came in halfway through and you want to get the rest, or if you had to dip out early for whatever reason, you came back, you'll be able to see that in the next day or two up on YouTube. And when we end the stream, there'll be a little Linktree QR code where you can go follow Skofi Growth Council and all the other things on all the other platforms. So if you want to see that content, be notified when it's available, go ahead and do the things. Jeffrey, again, thank you so much for being here. And everybody who's watching here today, we appreciate you, and we'll catch you all next time. Okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
You bet. Bye.